Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's video on working with silicone. The silicone we will be working with is a paste style silicone that we apply with our hands. My favorite brand and brand of choice is Blue Star RTV 3325P. There are links in the description below to similar products that are more readily available around the world, so check those out if you're interested in using a similar silicone to me. Just because it's paste silicone doesn't mean you shouldn't be wearing gloves. I'm not wearing gloves right now, but I do suggest that you wear gloves just in case. Gloves tend to be a little bit annoying, I find, and they stick to the silicone, creating a bit of a mess, so a lot of people don't really like using them for that reason. But a trick to combat this is to have a tray of sunflower seed oil or some other oil next to you that you can dip your glove into. This keeps them from sticking too much to the silicone and allows you to work without too much annoyance. So it's a good trick, but I personally prefer to just use water and my hands. The application of this silicone is very straightforward. You apply it by hand and cover the entire sculpture with a thin layer of silicone. The first layer should be quite thin in order to not trap, or at least be able to see if you've trapped and then fix it, any air bubbles. Air bubbles will show up on the surface of your cast and you will need to take care of them then, and it's better to take care of it now. A good thickness to aim for is barely thick enough to avoid it being completely transparent. As you can see on my sculpture as I'm applying the silicone here, you can see the color of the clay through the silicone in some areas, and this is a good thickness to aim for. You have to apply this first layer with a lot of care, because any damage to your sculpture during application will be recorded in the silicone, so make sure you take your time. However, once you've started applying a layer, you shouldn't stop halfway through. Keep going until the entire layer is complete. If you don't, you might run into issues where the second part of the layer doesn't stick properly to the first, and that's obviously an issue. This problem is called delamination. The second layer is essentially more of the same, but you can work a lot faster and worry less about air bubbles. An air bubble or two in this layer affects us less than an air bubble in the first layer, where we record all the detail of our sculpted surface. Depending on the complexity of your sculpture, you might need to remove some pieces from the sculpture, essentially cutting the sculpture apart. Now, it's hard to explain exactly how this decision is made, but if you can imagine me trying to get a plaster model mold piece out from behind the smold second figure, I think you'll understand what I mean. That would obviously be a very difficult, if not impossible, thing to do. So in those cases, it's best to cut the sculpture apart. I prefer to add silicone, essentially finishing the silicone layers before cutting my piece apart, because then my surface is well protected and there's less damage, or at least less potential damage, to my sculpture. To begin with, I plan out the cut by drawing where I want all the cuts to be on the surface of my sculpture using a black marker. Then I'll cut through the silicone using any sharp blade. Inside the clay, there is armature wire that needs to be cut in order for the second figure to be removed from the main figure of Kronos. And to accomplish this, I use a pair of side cutters. In larger pieces, I might use a metal saw and kind of saw the armature off, but here the armature wire is very thin and easy enough to cut with the side cutters. Often enough, in larger scale sculptures, I would have made model mold pieces as well in order to protect the piece that I'm cutting off even better. The model mold piece will obviously completely hold the piece that I'm cutting off stable. This is not really an option here, however, as there is no room in this small scale to do so, which is why I have to cut it apart in the first place. Now, I might end up dealing with this in a different fashion in the larger scale version of the same sculpture that I plan to make. So, in a year or 2 years, I'll make videos of me casting that sculpture and you'll be able to see how I deal with that then. With all the cuts made, the piece can be removed. Be very careful that you not only have cut all the wires on the inside completely off, but that all the silicone have been cut through all the way as well. We don't want to create any rips or tears in our silicone at this stage, and we don't want to distort the silicone or the sculpture by pulling wire out from inside it or anything like that. Where we cut the piece off, we now have a hole with clay showing through. We want to plug these holes with silicone, but first we want to smooth out the clay a little bit, so we use a small loop tool to this end. This makes it easier once we cast the figure to put it back together. The clay is a lot easier to smooth out than resin, so if we don't do it now, we'll be sanding these areas later on. Let's take a second to thank today's sponsors, my Patreon supporters on Patreon, who have ensured the continued existence of this channel and allowed me to upgrade my gear bit by bit, making better looking and better sounding content for all of you watching. If you are interested in supporting the channel, or perhaps interested in getting some personal feedback on your sculptures from me, then Patreon is the place for you. You can get in-depth feedback on techniques and how you can apply them to your own work. Anything sculpture related goes. We can talk about armatures, supplies, mold making, anything you need help with in your sculpting endeavors. And there's also more extensive and in-depth video tutorials on my Patreon page at this moment for anybody who pledges $5 or more. So check it out, there's a link in the description below. With the clay smooth, we can apply silicone to plug the holes. And again, in larger scales, I might make a different decision about this actually, as having a few openings in your mold in order to work the inside of the mold can be really helpful when you're trying to make a hollow cast. But in a small scale where the piece will be cast solid, there's no need for this and we can plug the opening with silicone. Okay, so at this point with the entire sculpture covered with silicone and our holes plugged with silicone, it's time to make the silicone wall. The silicone wall is the meeting point between the front and the back half of our silicone mold, and the area where we will cut the front and the back half apart. Now, if we misplace the wall, the silicone will not peel off, or peeling it off, our sculpture will be very difficult. I have a few easy, or somewhat easy rules that I try to follow when deciding on where to place the wall. I try to make sure that at least one half of the mold will only have 1 to 2 pieces of mother mold if possible. In this case, that's possible on the back because it's a lot smoother than the front with a lot less complexity to it. Using clay as markers helps me see where the wall should be placed. I need to be able to see all the clay markers from both the front and the back in order for the mother mold, which will eventually sit on the outside of the silicone, to come off. The front will be more complex, in this case needing 3 mother mold pieces. As I plan and build my silicone wall, this has already been considered, by the way, so I'm not simply building my silicone wall without thinking about how I will construct my mother mold on top of it. And in the next episode we will talk all about the mother mold. The silicone wall is handmade, and to speed up the process a lot, I use a catalyzer, a fast catalyzer for my silicone that sets up a lot quicker than the regular catalyzer. This catalyzer happens to be pink, which means I get pink silicone, which is nice. Because it sets up fast, I can build up layers of this in very rapid succession. Regular catalyzer would have needed to be chased and babysat, meaning that I have to pay attention that it doesn't sag or move on me while it sets up. But this catalyzer sets up in 10 minutes and you can move on to the next layer very, very fast. However, even with this fast setting catalyzer, a layer that's too thick will tend to sag. With 2 layers of pink silicone to add height and width done, I add a final layer of regular yellow catalyzed silicone to integrate my wall into the rest of the mold, make things pretty and more functional. A wall with nice 90-degree angles will register better to the mother mold for a longer period of time, and having the entire mold be the same color I think is a lot nicer and looks more professional, should the mold end up in a foundry for bronze casting, for example. Plus, the pink catalyzer can potentially delaminate, but with the yellow silicone encasing it, this becomes less of a risk. Okay, that's it for today. Next video in this series, which might come next week or something else might come out next week. Either way, the next video in this series will focus on the plaster mother mold, which will cradle the silicone and make sure that we can make accurate castings of this figure. Once that's done, we'll move on to casting this figure in aqua resin. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for a new video next Thursday. Hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. If you enjoyed the video, click the like button and share with your friends and family. It really helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.